this session. Here we go. There was a lot of interest in it, and we would love to share this with people afterwards. We will have a breakout room together later that won't be recorded. So we'll get underway in a moment. I'm just going to begin by asking our wonderful Director of the Centre for Social Impact, Karinia Lee, to open with a karakia. And then Chloe Harwood is going to say a few words about this Kia Whiti Tonu series, which this session is a part of, and then we'll begin. Kia ora, Karinia.
Kia ora. Kia inoi tātou. He honere, he karoria ki te atua, he mangodongo ki te mata o te whenua, he whakaro pai, ki ngā tangata katoa, he whakamau maharatanga, ki ngā mate, moi mai rā, moi mai rā, moi mai rā. Ki te honga ora, tēnā tātou katoa. He whakahonere ki kingi tūheitia, e noho ana i te ahu rewa tapu, o ona mātua pai marire, nō reira, nau mai, haere mai, whakatau mai rā ki tēnei hui. Ko Karinia tāku ingoa, ko Kaihotu of Centre for Social Impact. Greetings, my name is Karinia, Head of Centre of Social Impact, and it's a privilege to have you here today. I'll hand over to Chloe. Thank you, Chloe.
Kia ora katoa, ko Chloe tōku ingoa. Thanks, Rachael and Karinia, for opening. So my name is Chloe and I'm an associate with the Centre for Social Impact. I'm really pleased to see everyone here this morning for our Kia Whiti Tonu series. So this is a free program of 90-minute workshops that are offered to the community sector by the Centre for Social Impact through support from Foundation North. The Kia Whiti Tonu series of free online workshops was launched in November last year, and this was responding to the need for capability and capacity building in community organisations that was identified through the COVID-19 impact survey carried out with Hui, Philanthropy New Zealand and Volunteering New Zealand. The introductory program that we ran covered grant writing, marketing and communications, innovation, strategy and wellbeing. And you can access all of the recordings and the PowerPoints from these sessions on the CSI website. These workshops were really well attended, and in March this year, we were really pleased to be able to announce a further 8 free sessions. So this year, we've had workshops on wellbeing, digital technology, working with the media, governance, innovation and strategy, and collaboration. And again, you can find all the recordings, PowerPoints, and any take-home kitties that were done for those sessions on the CSI website. At the end of the session today, we'll be asking for your feedback, and this will be via a survey link in the chat. This is really important as it helps drive our future program delivery. The feedback from our last series helped inform what we offered this year. So we really are keen to hear what you're interested to learn more about and what you're interested to see future workshops on. Before we start our session, I'm just going to ask you all to take part in a really short poll. This will ask you if you've received funding from Foundation North in the last 2 years. So Foundation North is supporting this series and they're interested to see how many of their grantees are accessing these workshops. I think the poll, there we go.
That's just the one question, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, super quick. There we go.
Great.
So, and then following today's sessions, just a reminder that we'll be sending a link to the webinar recording, the PowerPoint from today, and a take-home kitty. So you'll all receive an email that has a link through to the website on that. So we hope that you enjoy the session this morning. I'm going to hand back to Rachael and yeah.
Kia ora, thanks Chloe, and kia ora Karinia for the karakia. So shortly we'll ask our speakers to introduce themselves. Then I'm going to share my connection with this kaupapa and take us through the outline for today. Just while we're doing that, if you haven't already, could I just invite you to put in the chat the organisation that you're coming from and what drew you to the session today. We've got a really diverse group of people who signed up, and be nice for people to get a sense of who's here in the space. So over to you, Sophia.
Mahi nui kia koutou, ko takatimu te waka, mo te pohu, te mauka, awarewa te awa, te rau aroha, toku marae, kaitahu me ka te mamoi, ka iwi, ko Sophia Beaton, tōku ikoa. Kia ora everyone, I'm Sophia and I work at the Southern Initiative in the Tamariki Wellbeing team and really excited to be with you all today and looking forward to these kinds of sessions in person soon. Kia ora. I'll pass to Penny.
O kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. Nā mihi nui kia koe kia karania, kia mō te karakia. And thank you, Rachel, for opening for us and Chloe for welcoming us into this space. He Pākehā hou, no Harmony me Inarani aku tipuna, I tuku aki au kia Tamaki Makaurau, ko Penny Hagen taku ingoa, kei te mahi au kia Auckland Co-Design Lab me Tamaki here ki te tonga ara the Southern Initiative, and just very pleased to be joining all these beautiful faces this morning, lots of new and old connections and friends, so just welcome everyone on a, I don't know what the energy is on a Wednesday morning in November in this kind of time, but just welcome, and it's lovely to share this space with you in the capacity that we have, so kia ora.
Kia ora, Penny and Sophia. My connection with this mahi outside of the Centre for Social Impact, I've had the privilege and the real joy of working with TSI and the lab over the last few years to develop and socialise this niho taniwha framework. And it's been quite a journey, and I've sort of been on the outside looking in sort of real with respect at the dedication that and commitment that's been made to embedding this evaluative thinking and practice. We're really interested to see how this lands with you today, the outline, what we're doing. Firstly, Penny is going to share the essence of the niho taniwha framework and their journey. Sophia is going to share how that's landed in practice in the Tamariki Wellbeing team. And that team has really engaged in depth with the niho taniwha as it's been developed over the last few years. We're then just going to pause and ask you to reflect by yourself for a couple of minutes on what you're making of all of that, how that lands in your space. And we're going to then bring you together in small groups, breakout groups for 10 minutes, just to see what's come up for you. Then we'll come back together and Penny will share the niho taniwha toolset, which is how this thinking gets applied in the work. And then we'll have Pātai, we'll have questions and answers. As questions or comments come up for you as we go through, we'd invite you to put them into the chat. We're going to have a kit of resources that comes to you after the session, the framework itself, the tool set, an article about the development of it, and we will undertake to provide answers to the questions we don't get to in the session. So that's our outline. Over to you, Penny.
Kia ora, thank you, Rach. As you can see, my words are already coming out funny this morning, so hopefully we can have a succinct sharing from Sophia and I in time for room to hear also the different strategies and experiences that are coming together on this call. There's lots of I guess learning and perspectives that have come together to make the work that Sophia and I are privileged to share with you this morning. So this is very much a collective learning effort that we'll do our best to share in the most succinct way. So yeah, forgive me if we end up being overtaken by the 101 days of sitting in our bedrooms, and you start to sort of lose track of space and time. But a real privilege to be sharing this work. So the first thing I'll just ground us in is the context of where we're coming from, usually based in Manukau. Some of you will be familiar with the Southern Initiative and the Co-Design Lab. We're an innovation unit, part of Auckland Council, but also connected to several central government agencies. And our mahi is about working with and alongside communities in South and West Auckland. Most of our teams come from those communities and places. And in addition to collaborating around the aspirations of communities and whānau, we're really interested, like I'm sure many other people on this conversation are this morning, in real serious systems change. So not about making things that we've got now better, but actually really shifting the conditions that influence the spaces and places and experiences that communities have, and the way that we're distributing our resources, and really trying to rebalance against the history and the ongoing effects of colonisation, structural racism, that bigger systems work, but doing it grounded with our feet on the ground in place. So we're like many of you, grappling with how do you keep going and responding to all the things that are right here in front of us, but also keeping that bigger picture in mind, which is that we need to be addressing some of those bigger issues and norms and narratives and the way that things are done at the same time. So this sharing of our learning journey is about us trying to bring those two worlds together, keeping on doing work in a particular way that's really focused on in place, but also connected to that perspective of the bigger picture, the history of Aotearoa and the dynamics that sit around that from a policy, environment, cultural perspective. So that's sort of our I guess the environment that we see ourselves journeying in, along with many of you folks. We do that by learning with people and partners in place. So we work together to try and test things out on the ground. We're really intentional about bringing together different knowledge systems and the prioritisation of mātauranga and Indigenous knowledge systems in that work. And the work is led by Māori practitioners and Pacific practitioners working with their communities, and also obviously leading with the lived experience of whānau and bringing together what's useful in Western knowledge systems. But the key thing for us is that we're trying and doing things together as we go with whānau, with government agencies, with partners, and trying to see what does it look like to work differently and what do we learn by trying whānau-led approaches. And some of the particular experience Sophia will talk to is around Tamariki Wellbeing, the work we've worked with whānau on in that space. So we have lots of different, we've grown quite a bit over the last few years, and there's lots of teams doing different things, which again, I'm sure people are familiar with, amazing teams doing amazing work. And how do you kind of keep connected about the different things that you're doing? We use the language of prototypes, but it could also be the programs that you're running. How do you sort of know the different learning and things that people are coming up against as they're working alongside whānau and doing different things in different places? And the niho taniwha was a journey to try and understand how we could put a learning practice, an evaluative learning practice around the innovation work, and in particular the place-based whānau-led innovation work that was already happening in the teams. And when we sort of went to look at, well, what's available to us from the world of evaluation or design or innovation, these other kind of fields that we could draw from, we found that there wasn't something that we could just take off the shelf and kind of pick up. We needed to weave together a bunch of different knowing and learning from different spaces and experiment and try and test different things. And we did this in a journey with amazing evaluators, Kataraina Pipi, Kate McKeag, Rachael Trotman. We had lots of friends along the way that we were learning from and experimenting with, and particularly the developmental evaluation discipline. But we also wanted to build up from the practice that the team and the innovators at the Southern Initiative were already leading on, their tikanga-led, values-led practice that was really important and strong in the work already. So whatever we built, and when sometimes, you know, you say the word evaluation, no offense, Rachel, it's not the thing that gets people excited necessarily. It might mean judgment, it might mean fear, it might mean, oh God, here's a monitoring thing on top of the work that we're doing. And that's not what we wanted to do. We wanted to bring in the learning process that can really activate and back and kind of add fuel to the work that we were doing and speed it up but slow it down to speed it up maybe, but definitely not kind of put a brake on it, which is what some people's conventional experience of evaluation could be. So we were looking for a learning practice that started with values and started with tikanga, that prioritised Indigenous knowledge, place and lived experience, that was based on the fact that we were acting and learning together with whānau, that this was the process that we were undertaking, that took into account that we were operating in a complex system and wasn't about trying to sort of reduce it down and say, well, we need to know that A equals B and kind of reduce the complexity, and that allowed us to track on what mattered to whānau and communities as opposed to just externally defined outcomes and outputs, although they do exist in our world as well. But we wanted to kind of be able to have all of those things have value in this learning process. What was really important also for us was that we knew we needed on this kind of complex journey to pay attention absolutely on what was happening for whānau and what mattered to them and what they named as the important things contributing to wellbeing, but also what were the barriers in the system or the changes in the system that would occur so that our team and our government partners were working in ways that were more responsive to what mattered and made the difference to whānau. So what are the issues that you come up against around funding, around procurement, around policy that are holding the status quo in place? And what's the learning that we were doing on that journey about that stuff? Where did we need to kind of pay more attention to or really work on that would help us demonstrate what promoting equity looks like, or shifting into a space where we start with whānau aspirational values or healing rather than a service delivery mechanism, for example. So we knew that these three things were important, but we didn't have a process for connecting up that learning across our different teams. And we also wanted to make sure that our version of evidence that we were producing was rigorous enough that it could stand up against academic versions of the world and contribute to those conversations. And we would feel confident that the practice-based evidence that was coming out of our work on the ground with whānau, was strong in that sense. I have some question marks about that now, but that was where we started when we were on our journey to develop something. And so there was a group of us that said, okay, this is our need. This is how people are working now. How do we complement that innovation work that teams are doing with their different focus areas around Tamariki wellbeing, whether or youth employment or Pacific prosperity? How do you build up from that really great relational practice on the ground, but connect it to these sort of strategic learning questions and ideas around system? So we knew we had to start with values, tikanga, and that diverse evidence base. What's our kind of whāriki that we've got underneath our feet, and grow up from there. We knew that there was lots of different programs and prototypes happening, and we wanted to develop the learning in those programs and prototypes so that they were strong and rigorous and the learning was robust, but they weren't just about perfecting a prototype or perfecting a program. They were about what are those things that we're trying and testing with families and whānau actually telling us about the system's conditions and what we could be trying to enhance in the system's conditions and policy conditions. So we wanted to be able to do the learning across the teams as well. It's not just three great programs, it's what the three programs or prototypes tell us about the bigger story about what's going on in our community. So if we've got a team working with Papakura Marae and another team working with an MSD office and another team working with Plunkett, what are they discovering together with those organisations and whānau about what's enabling them to enhance conditions for wellbeing and what's getting in the way? What's that collective learning? And then we wanted to be able to, of course, connect that up and down to the bigger kind of moimoia or vision of our work and our collaborators, and understand if we're going to really pay attention to things, what should we drive towards? And everyone can relate to that idea of needing to be, needing to be able to prioritise and be confident that we're going to do this direction over that one for these reasons. So we wanted, out of this sort of thinking about what we needed, a sort of layered learning system started to emerge based on those values, but how we would connect the learning on the ground with bigger learning across those activities. And from that, as some of you would recognise, the niho taniwha, or teeth of the taniwha pattern started to show itself in the work. And that then took us on a journey to understand the niho taniwha more, and whether that was the right thing for us to be understanding our work through. And we were guided by lots of different practitioners and experts in that conversation. So we talked to different carvers and weavers. So Luella Lineker led this conversation with different Māori practitioners and Pacific practitioners about this. So some of you would recognise it from carving, from tāmoko, from weaving. It shows up all across the Pacific, this particular motif, but it's grounded here in Aotearoa by Māori and is used in different ways to mean different things. And so we learnt some about the pūrākau of taniwha in Tamariki through Ngāti Tamaoho, for example, the taniwha that are in the manako and the waitemata. How does that connect to a learning system and work? The relationship between niho taniwha knowledge and whakapapa. And on that journey and working with kaumātua like Reriara Makiha, who also guides us in this idea of navigation, and navigation being a tool for complexity and complex journeys. And that's something that we can really relate to, right? Our journeys don't feel like a Gantt chart. They feel much more like a journey on the ocean, where 1 minute you're a bit confused and you can't see anything, and then suddenly the tohu is clear and you can move on. And then the next minute a storm comes in and you're like, oops, we thought we were going to land tomorrow, but actually we're going to have to circle for a couple of days before the weather passes. That feels much more like the work that we do than a kind of A equals B equals C. So we spent quite a bit of time, I guess, learning about the niho taniwha as a potential learning system for us, and whether that symbolism was okay for us to use. And we were comfortable that it helps us connect into learning and a learning system in different ways. And we've continued to explore that relationship with some of the mātauranga that sits around this. And I'm just going to hand over to Sophia, who's going to talk a little bit more about how we've explored and used this to bring this practice alive.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in here and tautoko Penny's kōrero. Beyond having those rich wānanga and conversations with others in the development of niho taniwha, we've really taken the time to explore the narrative and framework so that it was more than just a drawing on a piece of paper. We built the niho taniwha out into a 3D model that you can see here, and the casting of the shadows and the multi-facets of the pyramids help us to learn new ways to see and think about it. We also spent time with the incredible Jack Gray from the Atamira Dance Company to help us truly embody, quite literally, the niho taniwha through dance. And doing these things has helped me in my own practice to have a more kind of visceral connection and understanding of the purpose and application of the framework. So Penny was just saying earlier, it's like a real shame that we're not together in person, where we could be building and making and even potentially dancing together and feeling niho taniwha. So it's just, yeah, back to you, Penny.
Kia ora. So it's just really important for us in particular with the team that we have who work with their full senses, that handing a document over with a toolkit in it saying this is how you have to practice doesn't have any relationship to how people feel and experience the work and the relationships in the work. So the exploration of how a learning process actually comes alive, and we are separate in our learning through the work we do every day, but then we come back and connect together and share that learning and then go apart again. And the motion of that was an important part of making this practice a lived practice that we're kind of continue to learn and evolve for the team. And there's a real tension, to be honest, between this and when you start to describe stuff in a tool set, which we're also going to share with you and we do work with. But this is just something that that we, I guess, continue to grapple with, because the actual experience of people moving from a doing mode to a reflection mode to a sense-making mode to a kind of lifting up and saying, actually, what are we seeing across all these things? I'm starting to spot patterns. They're quite significant shifts in the way we think and be. And some of us are very orientated towards one over the other. And so helping the team to build those different practices and go, oh, I'm moving up now. Actually, I need to come up and have a different kind of conversation, or now I'm dropping back down in. There's a sensitivity and sensibility in that is a felt experience, as opposed to a read a document and figure out what you should do next kind of thing. So we're learning about those relationships all the time. What came out of that was this niho taniwha framework, which has those 3 levels that we talked about. So the 3 wahiako, where you're in the yellow space, you're learning about, you're doing your everyday work, your programs or your prototypes, and you're just paying attention to what's happening on the everyday. And then there's moments in time when we pause, perhaps once every 6 months, and go up into that next space where we're like, what are we seeing across all these different programs? What's coming up? What's showing up? What's that telling us about our theory of change, how we think things happen? And then points where we can actually look across the whole team and start to have conversations about what's surfacing. We've got quite good at the 1 and the 2, and we're still working a bit on the 3. That tends to be still pretty organic. But that idea that it's grounded very much in the whāriki and the tikanga and the values, and that's what tells us what rigor looks like, as opposed to a specific methodology being the thing that defines rigor. And so there's this kind of process and set of practices and tools that help us move up and down between these different spaces, or wahiako, or learning spaces, paying attention to those 3 things of systems change, outcomes, and strategic learning across all of them as we go. And there is, as I said, a tool set, and we'll share that with you and talk a little bit more about the specificities of that in the second part. But I'm going to pause now and hand to Sophia, who's going to just sort of put this into some practice. How does it actually look within a context of the Tamariki Wellbeing mahi that they're doing? So I hand over to you, Sophia. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Penny. So I'm part of the Tamariki Wellbeing team inside of the Southern Initiative. And Tamariki Wellbeing is one of 4 critical areas that the wider TSI is focusing on. And our mahi is to support and improve outcomes of whānau and their tamariki, particularly in that really critical time period of the first 1,000 days, from a conception to about 2 years old. And to do that, we work on the ground with whānau in place, supporting whānau to lead their own responses and develop new and compelling alternatives to the status quo. So our mahi is not really about refining or developing a program or service per se. And we also work alongside system partners as well, like libraries or Plunkett, MSD, and others, to help them shift towards more tamariki responsive ways of working. And we use this to demonstrate, learn, and model what it takes to make bigger shifts inside the system. So what that often means in practice is that we're doing 3 things all at the same time. So we're focused in locality and place, learning alongside whānau about what matters to them and the reality of their lives, trying and testing new things. We're also looking outwards and across to help us understand how we're pushing into systems at any point in time. And we're looking internally, how are we working? What is it that we're doing or not doing that is making a difference or holding the status quo in place? So today I'm going to try to do my best at grounding us in the niho taniwha in one of these yellow triangles here, to describe a little bit what it looks and feels like to hold all 3 of those things in a way that allows us to learn our way forward into transformation, really. To steal a line from Penny. You can move to the next slide. But before we move down to that learning space of the yellow triangle, it's important to contextualise ourselves in our whāriki. And this talks to the whakapapa of our mahi, the values, the tikanga, the knowledge and the evidence that guides the work, and has helped us to develop our theory of change. So we draw from Western science, including big data like the longitudinal data from the Growing Up in New Zealand study, and developments in neuroscience and child brain development. We're informed by the lived experience of whānau, including the early years challenge that was about understanding parenting experiences in South Auckland. We draw from and find ways to privilege mātauranga Māori, including traditional parenting practices or navigational wayfinding. We form new kinds of practice-based evidence by working and doing things with whānau in the real world. And we're, of course, held and guided by our tikanga. And this helps to inform the way that we work and the outcomes. So this whāriki helps us to develop our theory of change as a way to make explicit how we think change happens, giving us a shared reference point across the team to learn about what works and why, and giving us the opportunity to test and iterate against that theory of change. And I'm sure theories of change are familiar to most people on here. You can go to the next slide, Penny. As both Penny and I have mentioned, in our mahi, we're paying attention to those and tracking three kinds of things. So whānau outcomes, what's making the difference and what matters to whānau. And in their language, what are the tohu or indicators that help us know that we're on the right track? Systems change, what are the changes in the system that are promoting the conditions for tamariki? And because this is where scale happens, when our partners and institutions begin to adapt the practices, policies, mindsets that whānau tell us are important. And our strategic learning, like this mahi, I'm sure as you all know, this mahi is hard and we're learning as we go. So it's important that we pay attention to what we're learning about change, what it takes and how. Where are the things getting stuck or really, really hard? And what does this tell us about where to head in the future? And we're tracking these three things all the way through the mahi, not just at the end. Next slide, Penny, thank you. So these are some real life examples of the multi-level outcomes that we're paying attention to in our mahi. So for whānau outcomes, quite often the things that matter to whānau are often not the things that we traditionally track or pay attention to. Things like the building of strong social connections and friendships. When whānau tell us that they're meeting outside of the mahi that we're doing together, that is a tohu or indicator to us that what's occurring inside the mahi is of value. People feeling welcome, trying new things, or being able to have different kinds of conversations about parenting with different people in their family that they've never had. When we notice these things, it tells us that we're moving in the right direction. For changes at systems level, for example, we might be paying attention to changes in language. It might be as simple as moving from the word client to whānau, or are spaces or environments more responsive to the needs of whānau who are parenting outside of the home? Do they have the minimum things that whānau might need in those spaces, like a change table or a space to connect with others without being bombarded with a service offering? Some of our strategic learning examples have helped us to think more about how we share risk and how we share power, how we enable whānau to whānau-led practice, leading with mātauranga, what happens when we privilege Indigenous knowledge systems above Western. So we're tracking all of these things all at the same time. And I'm now going to talk a little bit about how we do that. So how we gather the evidence that helps us to understand what is happening and the impact. So we do internal rapid reflections. So we do weekly sessions with others in the team. And that helps us to get out of our heads and out of the detail and into what have we learned and what do we think is going on? What do we think we've heard or seen or noticed? What's working well? What's not working so well and why? What are we learning? I have to say this requires us to make space for that and time and energy for those moments. Sometimes it's easy to just get caught up in the doing, but it has been really critical for our work to build a disciplined approach into these reflective practices. One of the other things that we do are external reality testing. So our internal reflections give us a hunch about what we think is happening and the impact. And reality testing allows us to kind of pop up out of that at different points in time and check in with others about what is it that we think we're learning, and is that right or not? So we think about what is it that we need to check or learn, who might be the best people to help us answer that. For example, if we've been noticing that there is a positive change in language amongst staff, we'll check in with staff about what their experience has been and what has enabled that change. Or we might even check in with whānau in that space to understand what is the impact of that change in language being for them. And to do that, we've used a range of methods. We'll just go in and have conversations with people, or we'll do small surveys, or we've held learning workshops to help us understand those things as well. And because we're doing these practices regularly and throughout the lifetime of an initiative, rather than just at the end, we're able to quickly fold the learnings back in and adapt and respond as we go. So it means we're able to be more reflexive in our mahi. Next slide, Penny. Thank you. So the collective learning for knowledge, or the wahia kōrua, is where we regularly get together across our teams at the prototype or initiative level to ladder up what we're learning. So it's the pink triangle there. It allows us to aggregate that strategic learning across our teams and identify what's working and what we might avoid, or even how to think differently about something. And for us, that means that we can actually go faster in our mahi, as collectively we can see quickly what makes the difference. Now there's a lot. I think Penny mentioned it before, you've got to move from the doing to the reflective to the synthesizing. And there's a lot of work in the lead up to these ARCL sessions. And the ARCL sessions themselves are quite time intensive. So we spend time synthesizing our initiatives, the learnings and evidence from our reflections and our reality testing. And then we might spend between 1 or 2 full days together sharing and further synthesizing across our teams. Those are some brain-bending, exhausting, and equally invigorating days together as a team, but you come out of it pretty knackered. But overall, for me, the niho taniwha has helped me to think about evaluative practice as a tool for learning, rather than just as a judgment about how good something was at the end of a thing. And it's helped me to build in a systemized and rigorous approach to learning that allows our work to respond and change in the ways that matter to whānau and that can support transformation. And I'm just so stoked to be part of a team where, and in the Southern Initiative, where this way of working is valued, and you have the space to be able to work in this way. So yeah, kia ora. Back to Rachel, I think now.
Kia ora, Sophia and Penny. There's a lot there, and you've done an amazing job presenting the essence of the niho taniwha framework. There's a question in there from Susanna, Sophia. If you can have a look at that, maybe in the chat. What we want to do now is just give you a chance to pause by yourself just for a couple of minutes, just to think about what you've heard in relation to your space. So there's 3 things. If you just write down what comes to you in terms of what are the values, tikanga, knowledge, evidence, perspectives that guide your work? What's the whakapapa sitting behind your own work? How intentionally are you building learning and reflection into your practice? And what attention do you pay, or what eyes do you have on outcomes for whānau or the people you're working with, your influence on systems change, and a strategic approach to learning? So we're just going to ask you to take a couple of minutes by yourself, and I'll give you a 1 minute kind of signal when we're about to come back. And we're going to use that for you to head into short breakout spaces for 10 minutes when we come back, just with 2 or 3 other people, just to see what's coming up for you. So we'll just pause and start now. Just write down your response to those 3 things on the screen there, and we'll bring you back shortly. Also, if you have questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, just another minute or so. These are also good things for you to take back to your teams and reflect on together. Okay, I can see people are deep in thought, but we'll just come back together now. There's been some great comments and questions. Thanks, Sophia, for responding to Susanna's one. Would either of you like to comment on anything else raised before we head into our breakouts, Penny or Sophia?
I can just quickly talk to a couple of the things in there. I mean, I guess across the team, it's taken up in different ways. So we don't, and it's our goal isn't like a comprehensive, everybody has to do X, Y, and Z. So we've found that there's different entry points for different teams and different momentum for different parts of it. And that feels okay. So even in the smallest kind of, I guess, take up, the space for a reflective conversation that produces value for people in itself creates more space, but it can take a few, I guess, we've tried different ways to help create those spaces. And in some teams, it was easier for people to take it up than other teams. And in one example, when some of the material was first delivered and it came in a very, I guess, prescriptive looking way, and people interpreted some of the reflection more like a form, like if do this so that can happen, as opposed to this is an active process with your team to collectively unpack some stuff. And we've come back around, and that's partly what the reason why the tool set looks like it does. So it's more guidance rather than like a template for everything, because some people just responded to that in a way that they were trying to fill out something like you would fill out, at the doctor's, as opposed to like, oh, it's an opportunity to engage in some questions. So we've had a few different goes, particularly for people who, so it felt like it was on top of, when it came in like a form to fill out on top of your work, when it was a space created to have a conversation about what was going on and be more noticing, and then have the space to respond to what you're noticing. So some people have picked it up like on the second iteration, but the first iteration, they had that kind of response. And we're practicing it with the other, our teams that work with external providers who are, we're funding relationships with that relational conversation. We're just starting to embed those conversations in. And gradually we'll build out the bits that are useful for the rest of it. But even just starting with that reflective conversation as part of noticing and understanding what's happening. People find once they do it, their value from it is strong enough that you can start to prioritize it. But there is a discipline building that happens around it. Yeah, so it's always a work in progress. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Penny. Okay, so if we can go to the next slide, what we're going to do now is just have fairly short breakout rooms of 3 or 4 people. Can you go to the next slide, Penny? And we just like you to do this just briefly introduce yourself and just have a chat about what came up for you from what you've heard so far, any questions raised. Amy, should we do 8 minutes for this? Is that okay?
Good. Yeah.
Yeah, and we just want to leave some time at the end for some questions and comments. When we come back from the breakout, we'll ask you to put anything that stood out for you in the chat, but then we're going to move into more of the how you do this work through the tool set and looking at a couple of aspects of that tool set in particular. So stand by and please join in a breakout room and have a little chat about what's come up so far. These questions will be in the chat as well. Welcome back. With just a few more seconds, I think everyone will join.
Penny, you might be sharing the wrong screen.
This is the...
Oh.
Okay, is everyone back now? Welcome. Hopefully, it would be great if you could share anything that really stood out for you or your group in the chat. That's right, Penny, that's the right screen. So now we're going to get into more of the how this niho taniwha practice is applied. Penny's going to take us through the tool set and look in particular at a couple of the tools that we found to be super helpful. And then we're going to open it up for questions, but please ask questions as well as we go through. Over to you, Penny.
Kia ora, welcome back. I'll try and do this kind of super lightly so that then Rach can bring in for the conversations at the end, and Sophia has touched on some of these. Hopefully, I know it was fast, but hopefully there was an opportunity just to connect with some other folks on the call and share some of your own strategies, because I know lots of people are working in lots of different ways that are also about building learning and reflective practice. So I know there's a lot of collective know-how in this group, and I don't know if there's a way after that we can hear from people what some of the things that they're doing to bring these into their organizations would be. That would be awesome. So alongside folks like Rachel, we have, in addition to kind of working on the idea of or the concept of how niho taniwha guides us as a learning practice. So this idea that if we're on a journey and we can draw on the navigational ways of navigation, the niho taniwha is about us collecting and capturing that learning as we go about what it means to journey to new destinations, and what are the tohu or signs that are important to tell us that we're on the right track. Perhaps they might have been different to the kinds of indicators that we might have been conventionally using in our services. And so we've kind of got a mixture of different tools that we're using and testing and evolving over time to support us in those things. And some of them will be very familiar, I'm sure, but they sort of work at different levels of the niho taniwha. So there's things that support people in their kind of reflection in the doing each day. So that those rapid reflection practices that Sophia talked about, as well as when we're moving into the ARCL sessions and kind of sharing what are the things that support us to bring that learning together, and very much continuing to tune these. But Rachel's helped us to develop another iteration, which was more in this kind of guidance space. So different teams will manifest these in different ways and use different templates, but we try and keep a coherent connection around some of the key things to do with whānau systems and strategic learning, so that when teams come together, they've got those points that they can share from, but it's not so prescriptive that teams that have their own kind of worldviews and ways of working are not able to bring their own work to it and define it how it needs to be for them, but there's enough that allows us to just come back together when we do and connect up. So the way that this particular version of the toolset, I guess, is shaped up as the first row, like how do we know what we're doing and how do we talk to people about that and share the kind of basics of the work? How do we go about gathering the learning and information as we go, and how do we summarize and share that? So that's how the tools are sort of separated out at the moment. And so this is just a dive into one of the tools that's about setting up where are we at, what is this prototype about or this program about, that takes it from just being a set of actions into kind of a learning process. So we can say, okay, well, we're going to set up a youth lab with rangatahi and they're going to lead out on the design process. Well, what's that actually about in terms of its learning orientation? What's it helping us understand about what's important for rangatahi, for whānau, and what it tells us about how ready the system is or not for rangatahi-led innovation processes, for example. So the canvas is something that we set up, the learning canvas, at the beginning. It's related to that prototype space down the bottom, and it just asks us a set of questions about the things that we're already doing. So what is it that we're trying to learn and test through this thing? What a part of our theory of change are we trying to test? Because we know that we don't know exactly how to get to the outcomes we need to get to. So what is the thing we're trying to learn more about? And what is the way that we're going to capture that learning? What data and evidence will we need to pay attention to understand, for example, how do we support our public sector partners, government partners, to incorporate rangatahi-led action in their work, not just voice, for example? What does it take for us to start shifting some of the ways that our public service teams think about designing jobs and involve rangatahi in the design of new jobs, that sort of thing? What would we actually be trying to test, and what do we need to track? But starting with the whāriki, what are our tikanga and values that guide the work? Because that's going to tell us what good looks like. So that has a strong connection to the nature of the outcomes. So if the values are grounded in whānau leading and whānau voice, then the outcomes need to be shaped by whānau and in their language, as well as the other evidence bases that we might draw on. But different teams, depending on what they're working on and the worlds that they're working in, will have different tikanga and values that help shape for them what good looks like. So this is a process we use to get the team to come together and think about what is it that we're trying to do and put a learning orientation on that work, and what do we have to wrap around the work so that we can learn as we go and feed that back in to the process in of itself. When you see the tool set, this is the guidance. This is what it looks like as a set of kind of prompts and questions, and there's some different ways that people capture that. Someone asked about documentation. Sometimes it's just a Google Doc, sometimes it's a picture, big poster, sometimes it's a Miro board. So different teams will have different tool sets that they're using to capture what they're producing as part of their learning process. The other tools that I just wanted to dive into a little bit more, Sophia has touched on too, which is the internal reflection and the external reality testing. So lots of people will be doing forms of reflective practice. The documentation of that and the analysis of that from a systems and whānau and strategic learning perspective is what helps us build up into a practice-based evidence. We don't need to do that if that's not what we're trying to do. If we just want to create a space where we're reflecting regularly and people are able to capture that, unpack it and say, so what does that mean? We could just do that. Because we want to be able to ladder it up and say, oh, over 6 months, all these projects have had these same issues, and now we want to be able to describe that and evidence it in terms of strategic learning around change, then the documentation for us is important, but also quite painful. So we're always iterating on how we do that well and how we come back and synthesize regularly around that work. And then the other one being the reality testing that Sophia talked about. And it's a funny name, but apparently it's an official evaluation term, but I just like it because it's sort of ironic. But it genuinely means, we're doing this thing, we think this is what's happening, but we need to go out and actually test if that's true or not. And it might be that you've done a whole series of work with a group of folks, and when you go out and check in on what's been the impact of that work, not just the monitoring of a program, but actually what's it meant for you to have this experience and work in this way, that's when we normally see the kind of ripple effects that we wouldn't be aware of if we didn't go back around and do that loop of reflection and understand that actually when we gathered together and had those conversations, it spurred people to go and act in new ways and do different things, or take that information to other parts of the organisation. And that's when we get the clues around what's most effective and impactful actually for a bigger scale of change. So it's an extra loop than what we might do just through kind of monitoring the actual action. So again, the tool set has guidance for what that regular reflection process might look like, how you connect it to your strategic direction or to your theory of change. So it's not just what happened, but what's it telling us about that bigger picture. And there's also one for the reality testing. And that looking down, looking up kind of motion is the thing that's been in some ways most powerful for some of the team. Otherwise, we do a strategy day, for example, and then spend 12 months just doing. But the regular looking up and looking down and just going, actually, is this action that we're doing still connected to the thing that we said was important? Are we actually putting our efforts in the right direction? Let's check in on that. Becomes a regular momentum or kind of practice that we often don't allow ourselves the time and the space for. But teams do have to craft the space, as opposed to somehow our weeks have got more time in them. That's not the case. We've had to work hard to figure out how to embed that in. So that's just a little dive into some of the tools, and we'll share the tool set with you so you can see how we've just described the different practices and how this gets collected up to feed into the ARPL sessions. But I'm actually just going to pause there, if that's okay, Rach, because we can go into more detail if people want, but just to create the space for some conversation around what we've shared or what people are thinking. Or is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. If you just stop sharing then, Penny. Yeah, so just to emphasise that you'll be getting sent the detail around all those tools. There's around 8 tools, and you can look at each of those in relation to your work and go, let's have a crack at this one, or we need to do some work here, or we've got this area really sorted. So it's all going to be coming to you, the detail around this, along with some guidance templates. There's been a few questions so far, so now we're in a space to open up for questions. While you're thinking of those, put them in the chat or put your hand up to signal that you want to ask a question. A couple of people have said, it's hard making space for reflection when you're busy. Government contracting resourcing doesn't support this level of practice. I'm interested in kind of your thoughts on that, Penny or Sophia, and also someone's asked, clarify what you mean by strategic learning. Let's start with those.
Do you want to go first, Sophia?
Sorry, I was too busy typing the answer to that strategic learning question that I didn't hear the first one.
Oh, there was just a comment on, it's hard making space for reflection when you're busy, and that there's often not the resourcing for this level of practice.
Yeah, and it is hard, and you have to build your muscle around it, and you have to take the time to really be disciplined about it. And I mean, we don't always get it right. There will be some weeks where we haven't had our reflective practice, but we always it doesn't go more than 2 weeks. So you have to kind of give yourself, cut yourself some slack sometimes as well, because we're still building our muscle around it. Yeah.
So figure out in this space what's most important for you, what's most helpful for your work. Penny, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree that we've got a real issue with the way contracting and funding is done, and that the focus is on what did you do and did it deliver to the 60 things that we specified in the contract. And so there is, I think, opportunities to just constantly kind of push that a little bit from the inside, because I'm very sympathetic to the I guess the tensions of the funding and the monitoring and the requirements. And so for our part, this is just the conversation that we have all the time with our government collaborators, particularly those who are responsible for commissioning. we've only made small headway in some spaces, but it's a constant part of our discussion and capability building with them around commissioning, and I'm sure some of you are involved in the same. That kind of reporting is absolutely unhelpful. So there is a bigger dialogue happening within government and around commissioning, which again, I'm sure many of you are part of, around what does helpful reporting and monitoring actually look like? And it's not measuring outputs. And it's also not funding only associated with program delivery. So I think there is a growing appetite to understand what that looks like and what that means to actually commission in a different way that does allow a learning function. But I'm not suggesting that that's going to suddenly start being rolled out across the board immediately, but there is definitely an understanding and a shift that habitual process that we have around reporting and funding for outputs doesn't in any way speak to the work that's important. And I mean, it's lived every day right now, right, through the COVID work, is that almost all the work that's making stuff happen is not the stuff that's paid for. It's all the relational, the networks, the extra things that people do. My optimism comes from, I think there's a much greater awareness of that than there has been historically, that our funding mechanisms don't help us to get to the outcomes that we want to get to. So there is a bigger learning loop, I think, about the conversation of those structures. And in some cases, there's not much wriggle room at the moment, but there is conversations and shifts towards that. At the same time, we're just also experimenting with really tiny things like half an hour every 2 weeks. That's all. So it's just like a little release valve for the team, just half an hour to sit there and download on, and that's teams working in really intense delivery environments right now in the COVID response, just half an hour, just to sense make the enormous amount of pressure and craziness and immediate decision making that people have been doing. And that half an hour is still really valuable, but that's all it can be at the moment, and that's totally fine. And I know you're helping with that work, Rachel. So I totally agree that our structures are not helpful, and we can collectively be agitating for some shifts in that as well as wiggling a little bit inside to do some reprioritizing. And I know people are very good at doing workarounds and making stuff work. So that's not an unfamiliar concept, I'm sure. But empathetic to the context and really trying to help agitate for a different environment for people to do the learning in.
Thanks, Penny. Sophia, if you can keep going answering that strategic learning question in the chat, that would be awesome. And we'll go to Shay, and then we'll pick up on this question from Kamal about Foundation North. Shay.
Oh, thanks, Rachel. Kia ora, Penny, Rachel, Sophia, that's been absolutely brilliant. My question is around that theory of change piece, because there was quite a few links back to that. And I saw the, if we buy in slide 18, and there was one before in slide 17. And just to, if you could kind of help us concretize that, what do you mean by if we buy, and I can't remember what the third bit was.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You could probably give some examples, Sophia, but I mean, that's almost like the most simplified version of a theory of change. So you can have theories of change that have got lots of components. That's almost like the most simple way of just getting people to pause and go, what is it that you think we're doing? Why are we doing it? And what do we think will happen? And we're very much of the favor that what you're doing is just making explicit your knowledge and your assumptions at this point in time. And if you're not changing those over the period of the work, then something's wrong with the work, because we're working in a space that's, we're trying to shift into outcomes that are not being produced by the current system. So we can't have all the answers, but we've got a good, strong evidence base. And we've certainly, there's lots of things that collectively we know don't work about the current system, but the theory of change is definitely to be updated and tested and evolved over time. So it's more of a sort of patchwork than it is something that says exactly why A is going to equal B. It might be something like if we enable opportunities for whānau-led practice by creating the space for whānau to build their own innovation capability, then spaces and environments are designed in a way that are responsive to what whānau need. There'll be much more specific ones. Sophia can probably jump in with some tupuna parenting and Tamariki Wellbeing ones. But it's about saying, what is the thing that we think will make the difference, this kind of strategy. How are we going to do that? For us, that's about how we're going to test it. So are we going to test it out by whānau are going to design their own kite where they distribute that kite to other whānau. So that's a prototype to understand what it looks like when whānau decide what matters and they go about doing that distribution. And then at the end of that, we get stronger networks and we get a more scaled response because whānau have been responsible and have built the networks themselves. So it's a way of describing the relationships between what we think matter and make the difference, how we're going to test those, and what we expect to see as a result. But all of those things are being updated all the time. I don't know if you want to add a more specific example, Sophia.
I'd also add that the theory of change can be iterated over time, and we have been doing that. So I've just been involved in a piece of work where we were exploring the kind of neuroscience around child brain development and how that can support and enable responsive interactions between parent and babies. So we thought that was the thing. And then as we moved through that work, what we actually learned was that it was the Indigenous mātauranga and knowledge, which was the thing that people most resonated with around that stuff. So we were able to change our theory of change to dive more into that. So instead of it being if we support whānau with serve and return interactions, it became if we help whānau to recognise and celebrate the everyday things that they do that are inherently the actions of their tupuna through storytelling, then we will enable more positive interactions between parents and babies. So it's allowed us to kind of have a question and what are we going to be learning about, and then also shift and change and adapt as we learn. Yeah.
It's really helpful. Is it a theory of change each prototype, or you've kind of got an overall theory of change?
Both. So we have one at that wahi ako rua, that kind of the second level, and then each prototype will have its own theory of change as well. So what we're learning at each kind of prototype or kind of initiative then feeds up into our overarching theory of change and helps to shift and change that. So the things where serve and return was quite prominent in our level 2 theory of change, that's now kind of shifted out because of what we've learned in the level down.
Some teams just have that zone 2 theory of change, and it's in the canvas that they speak to the outcomes and how they relate to that theory of change. Yeah, there's more detail on all of that in the tool set. We'll come to you in a second, Kat, just in terms of the Foundation North question. We'd encourage you when you're applying to Foundation North to talk to an advisor about that. There is a willingness, especially in the impact funding space, to explicitly support good learning and evaluation. It's in their interest to do that. So encourage you to talk to people about that and build that in. Kat.
Kia ora. I just want to tautoko the work that you are doing here, as well as sharing the knowledge with us. I think it's really important that it's distributed so we can all learn from it. So thank you. I really like the stuff you've talked about on the whānau-led initiatives. I think that's where we'll see the real systemic change. I do wonder, though, I guess my question is around how you build the whānau-led and the user-led change into your measuring models. They can be some of the hardest ones to track. And so, yeah, I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit more.
When you say build it into the measuring models, what do you see in your mind?
I guess I'm wondering, when we try to seek user feedback, it can sometimes be some of the hardest tracking, and so we try to work on creative ways. So I guess if I'm in our mahi, we're looking with rangatahi and a more individual and small group level. So if we're looking to enact systemic change on a wider whānau and community level, it feels quite challenging to me. But I think it's so important. So I guess it's how do we test that we're on the right path? How do we, I just wondered if you'd had experience in that with working with TSI. I know there's lots of work happening on that space.
I guess one of the things that we're conscious of doing, maybe this is a personal preference, I try and stay away from the term measure, because sometimes it's helpful and sometimes it's unhelpful, and often the default for measure is some things that have been externally defined by somebody else. And so although there's good things that we can measure and there's good measures, we tend to talk more about what are we tracking and paying attention to. And so we work sort of at a local and I guess global is the wrong word, but like not local, higher than local, if you like, level, in terms of if we're working with rangatahi or whānau, that conversation about what's going on for them in that process is ongoing all the time. So they're contributing to the reflection, they're contributing to the reality testing, they're contributing to defining and making sense of the language and the terms and matching those to meaning. And that might include connecting those things with what an evidence base says, an existing evidence base says about good. So that stuff's localized through the process in and of itself. But at the same time, if we're paying attention to what's happening in the system and what system changes are, so like what Sophia shared before, the 3 levels, that's really our way of kind of tracking and paying attention to change. Over time, we can tell things like shifts in language inside a team are usually an important indicator of some other shifts that are going on in mindsets and positioning, redistribution of resource. So you can usually see experientially the process that a team goes through when they think, oh, I have to let go of some power here in order to enable whānau to make some decisions. Those things are generally show up quite, they're quite visceral experiences for a team, because those shifts are so profound. To shift from counting something that's kind of been dictated, like did you attend or not, to shift to did the engagement that you have with us help build your social capital? They're big shifts that are occurring for teams. And so it's quite visible when people are doing that stuff. So that paying attention to what's shifting is more useful for us than the measurement language quite a lot of the time. I'm not sure if that answered the question very well.
Can I just add to that briefly? Penny talked earlier about Mātua Ririata providing us with that navigational thinking about how our ancestors sat and observed and the world around them. And there's something that's I think there's a real skill in that, and just being able to sit and observe and notice, and that being a full body and sensory experience. So when you're working with whānau, those and system players, you're more attuned to some of that stuff. Yeah.
Thanks, Sophia. That's gone a little way into Mike's question here around preferencing, how do you preference matauranga Māori based approaches. Anything further to that, and then we'll end with Lenny, your question, and then we'll pass back to Karinia to close.
Do you want to talk to that matauranga Māori question, Sophia, or don't?
Yeah, I can talk to it from the experience that we've had around going from the neuroscience to actually the Indigenous approaches. They were actually the original neuroscientists, I'll have you know, out opener. And part of what's helping, and we're not there yet, but helping others to lead more with the mātauranga rather than those scientific approaches, is the evidence that we're actually building with whānau through this mahi. So because whānau are telling us that that is the stuff that they most resonate with, we're observing and they're telling us about changes for them, then we're building up the evidence base that's rigorous because of the systemized approach we have to gathering evidence that for people who need kind of that rigor, it's certainly really helpful in having those conversations with others.
I'd just add that we're always agitating too for people when we're working with them to say, where are you starting? What's your values base and what's your evidence base, and be explicit about that. And where is mātauranga in that? Where is lived experience? So at a minimum, it's visible for people what the default is that's occurring at the moment. So that's just another part of it.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Penny. Thanks, Sophia. Really sorry, Lenny. We probably need to wrap up. If you could put your question in the chat, we will come back to that. I just really want to thank Penny and Sophia deeply on behalf of us all for bringing your wisdom and experience into this space and sharing it so beautifully with everyone. I will hand that now back to Karenia to close our session, and I think there'll be a link in the chat to a little survey. There it goes there. And we'll be coming back to you soon with all the resources from this session. Thank you all so much for coming and kia kaha with all your mahi in these times. Karenia.
Kia ora, Rachel. Ngā mihi nui, kia koutou. I acknowledge and tautoko Rachel's comments. Thank you, Penny. Thank you, Sophia, for today's session, and extremely enlightening. And thank you, Rachel and Chloe, for putting it all together. It's been a wonderful session, lots to think about. I will close this out with karakia whakamutanga, kia inoi tātou, kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o tō tātou ariki a ihu karaiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhi ngā tahitanga, ki te wairua tapu, ake, 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 āmene.